Well, hello and welcome to our Hearing Health Foundation's research webinar. I'm coming to you live from New York City. Please do enable the Zoom captions by clicking the CC button in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. And these captions can be moved anywhere on your screen. And if you need any other assistance using Zoom, please follow the link to the technical guide shared in the chat. Also, please note that this event is being recorded and will be posted with captions. Now, by way of introduction, my name is Dr. Anil Lawani. I'm a professor and vice chairman for research in the Department of Otolaryngology, Head and Neck Surgery, or Ear, Nose, and Throat, as well as the associate dean for student research at Columbia University, Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons in New York, and thus the buildings in my background. Now, I'm also a board member at Hearing Health Foundation and head of the Hearing Health Foundation's Council of Scientific Trustees. Now, the council oversees the Emerging Research Grants Program, affectionately known as ERG. So ERG is a competitive program that awards funds to researchers conducting cutting-edge hearing and balance research. Now, these grants supported many leaders in our field to become successful scientists, including Dr. Subong Kim, our speaker today. Well, now let's get to the topic of our webinar today. Noise reduction is one of the most widely used features in modern hearing aids. In this webinar, Dr. Kim discusses a novel approach to measuring how well noise reduction features work for individuals and also uncovers the brain mechanisms underlying individual variability and noise reduction outcomes. A 2022 to 2023 ERG recipient, Dr. Kim is an assistant professor of audiology in the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders at the New Jersey's Montclair State University. Now, Hearing Health Foundation's ERG program that provides seed money to scientists who are starting out in the field of research is only possible through the generosity of supporters like you. Now, if you'd like to support our work on hearing loss, tinnitus, and related conditions, you can do so today at HHF, as Hearing Health Foundation, hhf.org/donate. And now we'll move on to Dr. Kim's presentation. And please do ask your questions through the Q&A box linked at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to answer the questions following the presentation. Dr. Kim, take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Lawani. Thanks for the amazing introduction, and thanks for having me today. My name is Subong Kim. I'm an assistant professor at Montclair State University. Today, I'd like to speak with you all about noise reduction outcomes and neuroscience. Before I start, I'd like to take a moment to express my gratitude for the research support from Hearing Aids Foundation and Emerging Research Grant. Currently, individual hearing loss, for instance, mild to moderate hearing loss, is mainly characterized by threshold audiometry, and hearing intervention is provided to maximize audibility. However, even with the prescriptive amplification, speech and understanding abilities in noise environment is substantially different across individuals with similar audiographs. So, for instance, there are two people, person A and person B, both are male, age of 38. They both have mild to moderate hearing loss and both are hearing aid users. But under the same background noise, person A is happy with it and the other person is not. And why is that? Well, let's talk about it then. In the modern audiology practice, we can provide prescriptive amplification But in addition to that, to deal with this background noise, we have multiple hearing aid features such as noise reduction and directional microphones. And there are other hearing aid features uh, we use to cope with the background noise. But today in this talk, I'd like to focus on the noise reduction feature because noise reduction is among the most widely implemented signal processing features in modern hearing aids, and it is routinely enabled by audiologists as part of the fitting process. Related noise management technologies such as active noise cancellation, they are all now common in consumer audio devices like earbuds that we use in daily life. However, what we don't know yet is the underlying mechanisms of noise reduction and the regions it yields variable benefits across the listeners. So here are some key questions. Why do some users find noise reduction helpful while others find it unpleasant or unnatural? What is happening in the brain when someone listens to speech through noise reduction? Can we measure the effect of noise reduction more objectively? Here are some overview of today's talk. Before we explain the details of each study, I'd like to discuss about the effect of noise reduction on speech and noise. And I have 3 individual studies that I'd like to introduce to you today. First of all, let's talk about effect of noise reduction on speech and noise. Noise reduction does not simply attenuate the noise. It comes with its downside, such as spectral distortion or speech distortion. So it is very important understand this trade-off between noise attenuation and speech distortion. And it is even more important to accurately quantify how much signal-to-noise ratio benefit was given by noise reduction, and also its downside, spectral distortion, how much spectral distortion has occurred because of noise reduction. Let's take a look at this graph. So x-axis is frequency and the y-axis is amplitude. And here there are 2 lines. Solid line is the input speech, and then dotted line is the input noise. Now we apply the Ephraim-Mallah noise reduction algorithm that we use in our study. Now you see this red dotted line that indicates noise after noise reduction was processed. And you see across the frequency, the level of the noise amplitude all reduced across the frequencies. This is the good side, and upside of using noise reduction. But like I said, there's a downside. Now the red solid line indicates the NR processed speech. Now you see, especially for the lower frequencies, speech amplitude also decreased. I mean, regardless of the number of the amplitude, the point is that not just the noise was affected, but also speech was also affected across the frequencies, and that gives speech distortion. Now we compare this black solid line and the red solid line. So unprocessed speech versus NR-processed speech, we can calculate the so-called magnitude-scared coherence, where 0 indicates that they are totally different and 1 indicates that they are identical. So across the frequency, the spectral coherence was converging to overall 0.6 in this study. So I would say this noise reduction algorithm we used provided around mild level of noise reduction. So like this, it is very important to understand this trade-off between noise attenuation and speech distortion. And specifically, with this specific algorithm we used in our study, around 3.5 decibel increase in signal-to-noise ratio was obtained, but also it comes with 0.6 spectral coherence. Of course, I like to note that these numeric values are just from our specific noise reduction algorithm we use, and these numbers could change, of course. But the point is that it is important that you measure the upside and downside of using noise reduction accurately, because a trade-off between positive effect of noise attenuation and undesired speech distortions can complicate the overall benefit. All right, now let's dive into each study. Study 1. Just like you saw from the previous slide, because of that trade-off between noise attenuation and speech distortion, hearing aid users often react differently to those effects introduced by noise reduction. In other words, some hearing aid users appreciate the reduced background noise, while others are distracted by the altered speech quality. It may depend on individual characteristics that are not fully explained by hearing sensitivity, and previous studies using various methodologies to trying to capture these individual characteristics, but it was not always successful. That makes us to think we may need to develop alternative methodology that is sensitive enough to capture those individual characteristics to answer the question of what are the neural mechanisms underlying these individual difference in noise reduction outcomes. Previous studies suggest that successful auditory signal analysis leads to more efficient unmasking of target sound, making the neural presentation of speech more distinguishable from background noise. Similarly, we quantify the individual's ability to unmask target speech by measuring individual neural signal-to-noise ratio. And this is the important concept that we're going to use in this talk, and give you more details about it. All right, let's go back to this diagram. So, like I said, under the same background noise, there are two people with the same audiogram, but one person was happy and the other person was not. Now, let's say the background noise level was 3 dB external signal-to-noise ratio. But there is a chance that these two people may perceive as differently, and they might have a different neural signal-to-noise ratio internally. So person A has around 6 dB neural SNR, but person B might have 0 dB neural SNR, even though that external signal-to-noise ratio was 3 dB. Okay, now how we measure individual neural signal-to-noise ratio. So this is the trial structure of our main experiment, which is the speech noise test. It's a typical speech noise test, but the difference is that we had the noise only period before we play the target word. So for instance, in this example, the noise started like half second before the word onset, and target word was presented here. And 1 second after the word onset, at the end of the trial, the participants were asked to answer the questions by giving the multiple choices given on the screen, and then they press the button to answer. And in this case, the answer was number 1, sec. Simultaneously, we used the 64-channel electroencephalography to measure their brain activity while they are doing this test. And because we had noise on the period and the word on the period separately, we could measure noise onset related ERPs and the word onset related ERPs separately here. So in this graph, this is the ERP time course graph. So x-axis is time, and then y-axis is the amplitude of the neural response. The thin line indicates the ERPs, and the thick line indicates the temporal envelope of those ERPs. Now we took a peek of the temporal envelope from the word onset related response and the noise onset related response, and calculate the ratio between B and A, and then we can calculate the neural SNR from each individual. Now, I like to note that this measure of neural SNL, we are aiming for auditory cortex response, where the initial cortical processing of speech signal happens. So in our studies, we use both sensor space or source space. If it was a sensor space, we use the front central channels, including channel CG. Now, let's take a look at how individual neural signal to noise ratio predict noise reduction outcomes. So here is the correlation graph. The x-axis is the individual neural SNL, and then y-axis is the behavioral accuracy changes, NR on minus off. So let's call it NR benefit here on the y-axis. And this is the correlation between neural SNL and the noise reduction benefit obtained from 36 young adults with the normal hearing. And it shows the significant negative correlation here. So which means the greater the neural SNL, the lower the NR benefit, and vice versa. The lower the neural SNL, the greater noise reduction benefit. So which means if you have better neural SNL, there's a chance that you may less like noise reduction, but if you have lower neural SNL, you are likely to have more benefit from the noise reduction. Well, now let's divide these groups, people into two groups, and I call them noise reduction lover and hater based on their performance change. I like to note that they never call themselves lover or hater. I just divide them into two groups just based on research performance changes with the research purpose. Now let's take a look at their EIP patterns from the noise reduction lover group first. As you can see, they show the big response to the noise onset and relatively weak response to the word onset. Now let's look at the noise reduction hater group. Relatively, they showed weaker response to the noise, but greater response to the word onset. And if we calculate the neural signal to noise ratio based on this, it was significantly different between two groups. So overall, these findings show you that individuals who are able to suppress the noise themselves and encode speech well, they may not appreciate noise reduction that much. But the other group who couldn't suppress noise themselves much, likely to have more benefit from noise reduction and appreciate the noise reduction like this. All right. I'd like to talk about one more thing here. So in the audiology clinical practice, you just not turn on and off the noise reduction. You can actually adjust the strength of noise reduction. So like mild level, strong level. So in the previous slide in study one, we used the mild level of noise reduction. So I call here NR1. Remind you, it provided 3.5 dB increase in signal to noise ratio, and then spectral coherence of 0.6. What about this noise reduction? So I call it noise reduction 2 here, which provide more noise attenuation, like 5 dB increase in signal to noise ratio, and spectral coherence is lower, so more spectral distortion happen. And I call it NR2, which is the strong noise reduction that I'll call. Now, in our recent study, we wanted to see how the noise reduction strengths affect the correlation between neural signal to noise ratio and the noise reduction benefit. First of all, we were successfully able to replicate the previous study that neural SNR can predict the noise reduction benefit when the noise reduction strength was mild. Well, this is the interesting part. With NR2, when the noise reduction strength was strong, so it even comes with more spectral distortion, neural SNR still were able to predict the noise reduction benefits. So overall, it shows that regardless of noise reduction strengths, neural SNR could predict noise reduction benefits. So here is the little summary. So each individual has a unique neural signal to noise ratio, even when exposed to same background noise conditions. Neural SNR can be measured using electroencephalography, and it serves as a cortical index that predicts individual differences in benefits from noise reduction processing. In other words, neural SNR can help identify which listeners are likely to benefit from noise reduction and which are not. Now, let's talk about study 2. Despite individual differences in response to noise reduction that we just saw in the study 1, noise reduction remains commonly a considered option when dispensing hearing aid. It is well known that noise reduction does not improve speech intelligibility, but noise reduction offers potential benefits to listeners such as improved ease and comfort of listening and reduced cognitive effort. However, what we do not know yet is what is happening in the brain when we process the speech with the noise reduction. So in other words, how does noise reduction affect online cortical processing of speech and noise in terms of where and when? All right, let's talk about location of spoken language processing. In the study 1, we were mainly focusing on the auditory cortex. But let's go further. So according to, for instance, the dual lexical model of spoken language processing, there are two cortical main pathways are involved in terms of spoken language processing. One is the ventral, which is a bilateral pathway that mediates the mapping between speech and syntax. And the other is the dorsal stream that mediates the mapping between speech and articulation. Because in our studies, we use monosyllabic English words and its performance heavily rely on sublexical phonological processing rather than semantic processing. In our studies, we are focusing on left hemisphere dorsal stream pathway, including supramarginal gyrus, which is the critical relay in the dorsal stream, but also inferior frontal gyrus, where this dorsal stream ends. Timing of spoken language processing is also important. Spoken words unfold over time and auditory information arrives sequentially. So for instance, for the word bakery, there were a number of lexical competitors at the beginning, but as the later arriving information disambiguates the word, the person will perceive the word as a bakery eventually. This whole processing is quite natural and almost automatic in the quiet condition, but in background noise or the speech input was degraded. According to the previous study, this whole process can be delayed like up to 250 milliseconds. What we do not know is that how this whole process happens in the brain regions that are related to spoken language processing, especially those two regions that I mentioned, left hemisphere supramarginal gyrus and left hemisphere inferior frontal gyrus. I'd like to note that in this study, we used the same speech notes text from the same participant, but we were mainly focusing on what's happening after the word onset in this part of the study. Now, let's talk about effect of noise level on cortical speech noise processing. We're going to talking about effect of noise reduction on cortical speech noise processing in the later slide, but this slide is showing that when we simply manipulate the noise level, so simply change the signal to noise ratio, how that affect cortical speech noise processing. So there are left hemisphere and the right hemisphere supramarginal gyrus, and these are the neural responses from those two regions. Many informations here, but let's go one by one. So x-axis, again, the time, and the y-axis is the amplitude. Right hemisphere did not show the difference between two conditions. And by the way, there were two conditions. So red line indicate the plus 3 dB signal to noise ratio. I'll call it easier condition. And blue line indicates negative 3 dB signal to noise ratio, which is the harder condition. If you look at the left hemisphere response, especially like around 300 milliseconds after the word onset, you see the greater response from the easier condition that strongly engaged left hemisphere spermatogen gyrus compared to the other condition. Now let's look at inferior frontal gyrus, left and the right hemisphere response. Now, right hemisphere did not show much difference as we expected, but in the left hemisphere, in this later timing, around like 700 milliseconds after the word onset, you see that harder conditions, so blue line, strongly engaging the inferior frontal gyrus activity compared to the other condition. Although statistically it was not significant, at least you can see the trend that strong engagement of inferior frontal gyrus at the later timing for the harder condition. Well, now, based on this, we might say the neural markers of efficient speech processing will be greater supramarginal gyrus activity and the lower inferior frontal gyrus activity. The question is, can noise reduction facilitate efficient speech processing? In other words, does noise reduction increase supramarginal gyrus activity and reduce inferior frontal gyrus activity? Okay, this slide will show the effect of noise reduction on cortical speech noise processing. Starting from the left supramarginal gyrus. Now, the black line indicates the noise reduction off case, and the red line indicates noise reduction on case. Around the similar time from the previous slide, like 300 milliseconds after the word onset, when the noise reduction is on, you see the strong engagement of the left supramarginal gyrus activity. And if we took the peak activity from the temporal envelope and visualized it, you will see the clear trend of a stronger activity with the noise reduction on from this brain region. Now let's look at left inferior frontal gyrus activity. So initially, the black line indicates the noise reduction off case, so it was a strong activity at the later timing. But when you turn on the noise reduction, so indicated by red color here, the activity reduced here. And if you took the peak activity, the trend is totally opposite from the supramarginal gyrus. That's why we see the significant interaction between noise reduction effect and the region of interest effect, because their direction is the opposite. And we could confirm that from the cortical map that's showing the statistical outcomes from the left supramarginal gyrus and also left inferior frontal gyrus. So here's the summary for the study 2. Noise reduction facilitate the speech noise processing indexed by cortical evoked responses through the dorsal lexicon pathway, despite no improvement in behavioral performance. And this study provides the better understanding of brain mechanisms underlying noise reduction benefits in addition to conventional outcome measures. Now let's dive into study 3. All right, in study 1 and 2, we mainly talking about the cortical measures, and we saw some promising results as well. But as we all know, cortical measures are easily affected by cognitive factors like working memory or selective attention. So that gave us a thought about maybe it would be nice if we could develop something more objective measures that are relatively less affected by cognitive factor using tools like speech-evoked auditory brainstem responses. The speech-evoked ABR offers an objective index of how accurately an individual encodes speech information, and it is relatively less influenced by cognitive factors compared to cortical measures. Prior research has demonstrated that background noise affects of cortical speech processing differently across individuals. While it is not so clear yet how individuals differ in their physiological responses to hearing aid signal processing strategies such as noise reduction. Again, in study 1 and 2, we mainly focusing on the cortical regions, but let's go a little bit below than that. So now let's take a look at brainstem level. In our recent studies, we used the speech level data in the cohort of young adults with the normal hearing and see how they react to the speech level in multiple conditions that involve noise reduction and background noise. So here is the speech level we used, and then this is their brainstem responses. In our most recent study, we used that speech level data and measured the brainstem response in 3 different conditions. So in quiet, in noise reduction, and you see that the response pattern is a little bit different across each other. Now let's take a look at the consonant portion of the response first. And now what we're going to do is compare each response and then see how much they resemble to each other. And we calculate the response-to-response correlation coefficient. So first of all, we compare the response from the noise to quiet, and it showed a very low coefficient here that indicates that in noise, brainstem responses is not consistent with the original responses in quiet condition. But here, when we apply the noise reduction, now we compare the responses from noise reduction and the responses from in quiet condition. The correlation coefficient significantly increased here, as you can see. So, which indicates that with the help from the noise reduction, the brainstem responses are more aligned to the original brainstem responses that was measured in quiet condition. So this result indicate that because of the noise reduction, these participants were relatively less affected by background noise. Now let's look at the vowel portion of the sound. And we apply the fast Fourier transform analysis to evaluate the spectral encoding from the fundamental frequency and the upper harmonics. There are 3 conditions. So black colors indicating in quiet condition, and the blue colors indicating in noise condition, and the red colors indicating in noise reduction condition. Now, if we look at the amplitude pattern from this here, from the fundamental frequency, when the noise was introduced, you see the amplitude drop from the compared to the amplitude in the quiet condition. But when noise reduction was applied, you see the increase of the amplitude of brainstem response again at the fundamental frequency. Not much from the upper harmonics. And if we calculate the amplitude ratio between conditions, you see that when noise reduction condition was compared to the in quiet condition, this amplitude ratio has significantly increased compared to the other pair, especially for the fundamental frequency. Those trends are not didn't hold in the upper harmonics, but at least from the fundamental frequency, you could see that this noise reduction leads to a better spectral encoding from these participants. Now, let's divide them into 2 groups, noise reduction lover and hater. So if you are focusing on fundamental frequency portion, you see that in the noise reduction lover group, they show the decline with the background noise in terms of amplitude, but their amplitude got restored with the noise reduction. This trend did not happen in the noise reduction hater group much. So overall, this result indicating that individuals who show the better spectral encoding with the noise reduction are likely to have better behavioral performance with the noise reduction compared to the other group indicating the potential relationship between subcortical noise reduction outcome and the behavioral noise reduction outcomes. Here is the summary. So our findings suggest that investigating the noise reduction effects on bottom-up speech encoding using brainstem measures is feasible, and the individual subcortical encoding of noise reduction processed speech may relate it to individual behavioral outcomes with noise reduction. Here's the overall summary. An individual's ability to suppress background noise and encode speech, quantified by neurosignal-to-noise ratio, can help predict how much benefit they may receive from noise reduction algorithms. Noise reduction can influence neural activity in brain regions involved in spoken language processing. Brainstem responses can offer a more direct and objective way to assess how individuals encode noise reduction processed speech. Again, I'd like to thank all the research support we got for this project. And I'd like to take a moment to thank my former PhD mentor, Dr. Inyoung Choi, and my postdoc mentor, Dr. Hari Bharadwaj, who both are also EIG scientists themselves. And these are our recent publications supported by Hearing Foundation EIG grants. And this is the lab picture at Montclair State University with my students. Thank you for listening.
Well, Dr. Kim, that was terrific. Thank you so much. Um,
Thank you.
you know, I'm going to start with a question, not from our audience, but for myself. And I think we should just start by defining what noise is. And does it matter exactly what we mean when we use the term noise, whether it's your experimental paradigms or in terms of, many of my patients go, well, they don't like a restaurant because there's so much noise
Yes.
and have difficulty.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about noise and noise reduction algorithms? And then we'll get to our attendees' questions as well.
Absolutely. So, well, this is what I always said to my students in my class, but the definition of the noise is basically unwanted sound. So it's relative. So any sound that you don't like to hear at that moment is a noise. So some sound could be a signal if you like to hear it at that moment, but that sound becomes the noise if you don't like to hear it for whatever reasons. So I'll call it, that's the definition of the noise. And regard to the noise reduction, there are multiple noises that interact with the noise reduction. Some are better interact with the noise reduction, and some actually do not interact very well with the noise reduction, which means, like for instance, speech-shaped noise, something like stationary noise that is well attenuated by the noise reduction, but something more like a babble noise, like a restaurant noise, that competing talkers that might be not necessarily attenuated by the noise reduction. And nowadays, with the more advanced noise reduction algorithms, they can pick up those different speech signals from different talkers, and they were very successful in suppressing babble noise as well. But traditionally, when it comes to noise reduction, we use at least research purpose, we use the stationary noise that works better with the noise reduction and to see how it goes.
There's a specific question, but you might make it into a late-term person. Bruce Sharp asks, the only noise reduction algorithm mentioned is of the DSP type or Ephraim-Mala type. Is
Mhm.
there similar research using AI-mediated noise separation? And what do you think, in general, what do you think about different ways to reduce background noise in hearing aids?
Very good question. I appreciate that question. So the Ephraim-Mala noise reduction algorithm that I used in our studies are basically spectral subtraction based noise reduction algorithm. There are multiple kinds of noise reduction algorithm. For instance, beamforming based or Winner filter or modulation based that are, and like you said, AI based noise reduction algorithms lately too. For instance, deep neural network based noise reduction algorithms. And there are many studies support that this advanced noise reduction algorithm actually helps better listening in the background noise. But the point is that some of you might think this spectral subtraction-based noise reduction that we used in our studies might be too basic. But important thing is that how we accurately quantify how much trade-off occurs with that specific noise reduction. And if we can do that quantification, we can demonstrate how this noise reduction affect brain activity or how individuals get the different benefit from this specific noise reduction. So that's the important thing. But also that, like for instance, AI-based noise reduction algorithm, it is clear that they show some enhancement compared to the relatively old node reduction algorithms. But from across the many studies, they still report that some people like it, yes, but some people even get worse in terms of their performance. And some of them, of course, they don't see any benefits from that AI-based node reduction algorithm. So what we concern that individual variability in node reduction outcome that still exists. Even with the advanced neural reduction algorithms. So that's why the scientists are still studying like what's the neural cause of those variability in terms of neural reduction outcomes and how we could accurately quantify what this neural reduction algorithm can change in our perception. I cannot hear you, Dr.
I
Lowen.
was going to say, I'm so sorry, I was muted myself. I said I was surprised, naively, of course, is that you're a physician. I'm not so versed in noise reduction and so on, that it has noise reduction also has consequences for speech signal. And
Absolutely.
one of our attendees, Dan Fink, says instead of focusing on noise reduction in hearing aids, why not focus on reducing ambient noise in public spaces, especially restaurants, like turning down the volume of background music, rock music, and so on? I guess my question is, can we do noise reduction with truly reducing only the noise, but leaving the speech signal alone? Can you talk broadly about that in any way you want to? I'm just as a layperson, as somebody who's a little naive about this, why can't we just simply I have a little heater going on, and I'm listening to you. Why can't my hearing aids, if I had them on, turn the
Uh,
heater off and only listen, make have me hear your voice?
Well, that's a fantastic question. I'll say we are getting there, not yet. But in the ideal world where we know what is exactly the background noise and what is the target speech, and then we can separate out them, we can completely shut down the noise only. But in the real world we're living in, like a restaurant concept, we never know that what's gonna be the next noise and what's gonna be the next target speech. And then during the conversation, the target speech from each speaker is keep switching. So it involves your own switching attentional ability as well, but also device-wise, so hearing aid-wise, technology is still not there yet. I mean, it's getting better, but it's still hard to distinguish perfectly between what is background noise at that moment and what is the target speech that hearing aid user like to listen to. So that is the reason that the noise reduction does not work always.
So your colleague at Montclair, Janet Conkey, asks, you said all the subjects in these studies had normal hearing.
Yes.
Were they also young individuals? And I wonder if a group of older listeners with normal hearing would demonstrate similar results in your studies. That was Janet's question.
Absolutely. Before I dive into that, so in our former studies, I didn't introduce here today, but in the CI patient that we did at the University of Iowa, that we demonstrate the relationship between neural signal-to-noise ratio and CI outcomes. What we do not know yet is that somewhere in between normal hearing and uh, deafness. So we are now focusing on mild to moderate hearing loss population, and especially older people with the mild to moderate hearing loss. And in my own lab, we are collecting the data right now. And this is only preliminary stage, but I'll say at least for the regarding neural signal to noise ratio, we are able to replicate what we found from the young normal hearing listeners as well. So which means even in the older population or people with mild to moderate hearing loss, we are still able to see the correlation between neural signal to noise ratio and their noise reduction outcomes. So I think it's quite promising, and it'll be out there sometime soon. So
Oh, very
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Can your neural SNR be used to diagnose CAPD? In the sense that they don't respond well to noise. They have greater reduction of understanding speech and noisy background. Can your neural SNR, could that be a diagnostic test in some ways for CAPD?
We haven't necessarily done in that population, so I cannot give you the answer clearly, but I think it's doable because this is basically, I mean, the concept of neuroscience is basically based on how well you can suppress noise well, but also how you will encode the speech information. So we use both information and calculate the ratio between two to define how much neural signal to noise ratio you have. So I think it's doable and related to the CAPD, and I think that'll be a very interesting topic to do in the future.
And I apologize for not letting people know CAPD, central auditory processing disorder. This is where they have very good hearing, but they have a lot of difficulty in background noise understanding speech. Harold Fisher asked, and he's of course now looking at implementation of what you're studying into everyday practical world. He says, is there a practical way that a hearing aid wearer can predict or determine if they benefit by noise reduction or is detrimental to them? So is there some kind of a thing that you're doing now that can be implemented for a hearing aid, user?
Absolutely. Well, now we are at the baseline study phase, and like I said, we're using like 64 channel EEG electrodes. So it is not practical yet, I would say, but I think there's still potential, like, because there are many options, like we could use dry EEGs, which is portable and easily accessible in the clinic. So that's the one way to do it. But also, I would say that in our preliminary study, that this neural signal to noise ratio that could predict the noise reduction outcome. This neurosignal to noise ratio is heavily affected by their selective attention ability. So if that's so, I think if we in the clinic, if we add something simple task that can measure their selective attentional ability, I think that's an indirect way to measure if they could get more benefit from noise reduction or not. So if they have good selective attentional ability, they usually have better neurosignal to noise ratio based on our finding. So they may not get much benefit from noise reduction because they can do it by themselves. But if your attention ability is not so great, you may need something help from the features like noise reduction, and then that'll save you some from your effort.
I forgot to mention that Harold Fisher's was a two-part question. The other one is, let's say that we can distinguish these two populations, those that benefit from noise reductions, those that do not. And if so, are there settings in the device or app that they can modify to compensate? So are there going to be features that, I mean, noise reduction, a certain level is going to be helpful to people just to work less hard or something.
Mm, mhm.
How do you see this playing out in the clinical world?
It's a very interesting question. My Our findings are more of like who's gonna more benefit from noise reduction and not based on what they have, like their individual characteristics. So if those people who already good at suppressing noise, our research is telling that you may not need a noise reduction, but people who need a noise reduction and adjust the strengths and um, more specific settings in terms of noise reduction, there might be another study to dive into the details about it because our findings is more of not every noise reduction is not for everyone. That is more of our findings. And if you get more benefit from noise reduction, you might want to turn on it and even adjust the strength level. But our message is more about depending on your individual characteristics, you might not need a noise reduction. So I would say that'll be my answer.
We're coming down to the last couple of questions, Dr. Kim. One of them is from anonymous, actually both of them are from anonymous attendee. One of them is, do the outcomes also apply to cochlear implant users?
Absolutely. Like I briefly said before, because my former affiliation was the University of Iowa with Dr. Inyoung Choi and teams, and we have multiple papers that show that uh, individual neurosignal to noise ratio can predict their CI outcomes. And those studies show that people with the hybrid CI actually had better neurosignal to noise ratio compared to the standard CI users. So there are multiple papers on that too. Yes, those population too. Yes.
Uh, can you can you speak to, people that have tinnitus? This is another question. I'm just sort of paraphrasing a little bit. People that have tinnitus or hyperacusis.
Yes.
Can your findings be applied to that? Do you think something similar is going on in those populations where the tinnitus is impacting their ability to understand speech, or hyperacusis is making them sensitive to some sounds more than others, and so on? Can you broadly comment about that?
Absolutely. So in our study, we call the noise reduction as cortical measures of individual noise tolerance. And we found that noise tolerance is not just a one layer. It could be multiple layers. Like, for instance, it could be noise annoyance. It could be about speech interference or listening effort or loudness perception. So because we really valued what hearing aid users or patients say about their hearing and noise tolerance. So we measure these brain responses too, but we like to match these our cortical measures with their subjective perception. It could be hypersensitivity to noise or tinnitus. So we keep going on this line of research to figure out when they say I have difficulty in noise or I hear ringing in my ear, we're trying to how we can connect with these cortical measures or subcortical measures we have to their subjective report. So far, based on our studies, we didn't see much progress, unfortunately, to directly matching, as you can imagine, to these cortical measures to the subjective findings. But we keep trying to see how these cortical measures, such as neuro SNI, could be actually coupled with the subjective perception of like noise annoyance, tinnitus, or hypersensitivity to noise. So that's what I can say. That we know the importance of uh, that, and we're trying to match between subjective report of noise tolerance and then cortical measures as well. So um, Yeah.
A lot of work to be done, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a great
Yeah,
opportunity
I'll keep you posted.
it'll keep you funded
Yeah.
for many years to
Yeah.
come, at that rate, I think. That's a great
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Wathakaf asks, what's the youngest age that you can assess listening and noise in children to determine if they need any noise reduction?
That's a very good question. I personally haven't done any studies in the pediatric population, but I'm quite positive that we could use the similar speech and noise task to measure their like signal to noise ratio, or we can measure the speech evoked ABR and then see how they likely to have benefit from the noise reduction. Um, yeah,
I do want to share Dan Fink, who shared with us the new definition of noise. This is just for the audience in general. It's not quite a question, Dr. Kim. Um, the new definition of noise published in the Proceedings of Meetings on Acoustics in 2019 and adopted by the International Commission on Biological Effects of Noise in 2023 is, quote, noise is unwanted and or harmful sound, end of quote. Similar to your definition earlier, I thought since Dan has gone through the trouble of sharing it with us, I might as well share it as well. So we're actually now at the end of our hour, Dr. Kim. That was really an amazing talk today.
thanks
Thank
so
you
much.
for uh, thank you for everybody who's attended the conference and Dr. Kim for this very informative presentation. We're so grateful to you, our community, for all the support of our emerging research grants program. Please remember that you can donate to our efforts to advance better treatments and cures for hearing and balance conditions at hhf.org /donate. And thank you. And please just enjoy the rest of your day.